What's unfolding around the Detroit Lions right now quietly reinforces something that a lot of fans sometimes forget to fully appreciate, and it starts with what's happening elsewhere when you look around the league and see former Lions assistants trying to establish themselves in unstable environments. It puts Detroit's current structure into sharper focus. The most striking example at the moment involves Aaron Glenn and the New York Jets, and the ripple effects of that situation land much closer to Allen Park than people might initially realize. Aaron Glenn was once viewed here as a future head coach, almost by default. He took over a defense in 2021 that was stripped down to the studs, a unit forced to start players who realistically had no business being full-time starters on an NFL defense. The results early on were ugly, but over time, that group became competitive, disciplined, and resilient. That growth earned Glenn real respect around the league, including from his own players, who voted him as one of the coaches they most wanted to play for. Eventually, the head coaching opportunity arrived, and he took it with the Jets, bringing along Tanner Engstrand, a coach who was highly respected inside the Lions building. Engstrand wasn't some fringe assistant in Detroit. He played a meaningful role in the offensive staff and was well-liked both professionally and personally within the organization. His jump from passing game coordinator in Detroit to offensive coordinator with the Jets looked like a natural career progression. But what followed in New York has been nothing short of chaotic. Just 23 days after the Jets played their final game of the season, Glenn fired Engstrand. Not only that, Glenn has now dismissed 7 assistant coaches, still hasn't named a defensive coordinator, and presides over a staff overhaul that feels more like panic than vision. From a Lions perspective, it's impossible not to compare this to the stability Detroit currently enjoys. While New York looks like a franchise scrambling for answers, Detroit continues to operate with a clear chain of command and a long-term plan. Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, and Chris Spielman provide a level of alignment that many teams simply don't have. That structure matters, especially when you see how quickly things can unravel elsewhere. The Jets just endured a disastrous season, one highlighted by historically poor defensive production and an overall lack of identity. Now, instead of a steady rebuild, they're in full reset mode. This is where Tanner Engstrand's situation becomes interesting for Lions fans. With so many offensive coordinator jobs either open or already filled across the league, his immediate future is uncertain. There are openings around the NFL, but nothing is guaranteed, especially after such a short and turbulent stint in New York. From Detroit's side, the question naturally arises, would it make sense to bring him back? The Lions have already added Drew Petzing as offensive coordinator and Mike Kafka in a special assistant type role, but modern NFL staffs are massive. There's room for quality coaches, especially ones who already understand the culture and expectations inside the building. And that's the key point. Engstrand was trusted in Detroit. He contributed to an offense that functioned at a high level, and his sudden firing says far more about the Jets' instability than his coaching ability. Watching Glenn struggle to stabilize his own staff only reinforces how valuable Detroit's environment has become. The Lions are no longer the league's cautionary tale. They're the example of how patience, aligned leadership, and smart personnel decisions create a foundation that others envy. This contrast becomes even sharper when you consider how the Lions are approaching the future. While other teams are cycling through coordinators and assistants, Detroit is layering experience and continuity. The front office isn't reacting emotionally to outside noise or short-term setbacks. Instead, they're quietly building depth both on the roster and on the coaching staff, knowing that success in this league is sustained by structure, not chaos. So when you look at Aaron Glenn's situation now, it's not about rooting against a former Lion, it's about recognizing how far Detroit has come. What once felt normal here now looks abnormal elsewhere. Stability has become a competitive advantage, and the Lions finally have it. That reality should matter to fans as they evaluate every move this team makes this offseason, including whether familiar names like Tanner Engstrand could find their way back into the fold. What do you think this whole situation says about the Lions' current leadership and stability compared to what we're seeing around the league right now? When you keep pulling on this thread, the deeper message for Lions fans becomes even clearer, because this isn't just about one coach getting fired or another team looking dysfunctional. This is about how fragile success really is in the NFL when it isn't supported by alignment and patience. Detroit spent decades living on the other side of this reality, cycling through coordinators, head coaches, and front office philosophies, often reacting instead of building. What we're watching with the Jets right now feels uncomfortably familiar to anyone who lived through those years as a Lions fan. Aaron Glenn didn't walk into an easy situation. The Jets were coming off a miserable season, a roster that underperformed across the board, and a defense that somehow went an entire year without recording a single interception. That alone tells you how broken things were. Still, the expectation around the league was that Glenn would bring structure and accountability, the same traits he helped establish in Detroit. Instead, less than a month after the season ended, his staff is being gutted. Firing 7 assistant coaches in that time frame isn't normal. It's a signal that something at the top is unstable, whether that pressure is coming from ownership, the front office, or internal panic. For Lions fans, this should immediately trigger a comparison. Think about how Detroit handled its own growing pains early in the Dan Campbell era. The defense was historically bad in 2021, the roster was thin, the losses piled up. Yet there was no mass firing of assistants weeks after the season. Adjustments were made, roles evolved, and the staff was allowed to grow together. That patience paid off. By the time Aaron Glenn left for New York, his defense had become respectable, competitive, and capable of holding up in playoff games. That doesn't happen if the organization flinches at the first sign of adversity. This is why the idea of Tanner Engstrand possibly returning to Detroit resonates with so many fans. It's not nostalgia, it's recognition. Engstrand didn't suddenly forget how to coach football in 23 days. His firing doesn't erase the work he did as passing game coordinator in Detroit or the respect he earned inside that building. If anything, his situation highlights how different environments shape outcomes. In Detroit, he was part of a stable ecosystem. In New York, he walked into a pressure cooker with no margin for error. And look at how the Lions are approaching their offensive staff now. Drew Petzing comes in with a clear track record, particularly in the run game, working with a healthy James Conner, Kyler Murray, and an offensive line that could actually execute. Mike Kafka is added as a special assistant, not because the Lions are desperate, but because they value ideas, experience, and depth. There's no sense of scrambling, no sense of plugging leaks. Everything feels intentional. That intentionality is the real story here. Around the league, offensive coordinator jobs are opening and closing rapidly. Some teams are on their 3rd or 4th plan already. Others are recycling names and hoping for a spark. Detroit isn't chasing trends. They're building layers. That's what good franchises do. They understand that injuries will happen, coaches will get poached, and adversity is inevitable. The answer isn't panic. The answer is infrastructure. When you hear reports about potential replacements in New York, including veteran names like Frank Reich being floated as possible solutions, it only reinforces the contrast. The Jets are looking backward for stability. The Lions are moving forward with a clear vision. That doesn't mean Detroit will never make mistakes. They already have, and they've owned them. But the difference now is how those mistakes are handled. Corrections are made without blowing everything up. For fans, this moment should reshape how you view the Lions within the NFL landscape. This team is no longer fragile. It's no longer one bad season away from tearing itself apart. While other franchises are stuck in cycles of reaction and regret, Detroit has built something that can absorb shocks without collapsing. That's rare, that's valuable, and that's why situations like Aaron Glenn's in New York, as unfortunate as they may be, end up highlighting just how far the Lions have come. Now the question becomes bigger than any single coach or hire. As you watch chaos unfold elsewhere and compare it to the calm, deliberate way Detroit is operating, how confident are you that the Lions are finally built to sustain success, not just chase it? What also deserves attention here is how moments like this quietly reshape the way the league views Detroit behind closed doors. Coaches talk, front offices talk, agents talk. When an assistant coach gets fired less than a month after the season ends, everyone in the NFL notices. And when that same coach came from a place where he was trusted, supported, and productive, the comparison becomes unavoidable. Detroit is no longer seen as a stepping stone franchise where careers stall or get recycled. It's being seen more and more as a place where coaches can actually grow, do good work, and leave with their reputations intact. That matters because stability isn't just about wins and losses, it's about credibility. When Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell sit across the table from a coach or a free agent, they're not selling hope anymore. They're selling proof. Proof that roles are defined. Proof that the staff isn't reshuffled every time adversity hits. Proof that people are evaluated over time, not over a few chaotic weeks. The situation with Aaron Glenn and the Jets, fair or unfair to him, highlights exactly what Detroit has worked so hard to avoid becoming again. It also reinforces why the Lions are so deliberate about who they bring into the building. You don't see Detroit making reactionary hires just to win a press conference. You don't see them chasing names because of resume alone. Every addition fits a broader structure, whether it's on the coaching staff or the roster. That's why even conversations about someone like Tanner Engstrand returning aren't emotional. They're logical. Familiarity, trust, and fit matter just as much as scheme. And for fans, this is where perspective becomes important. It's easy to get frustrated when the Lions don't make a flashy move or when they choose continuity over change. But moments like this remind you why that approach exists in the first place. The league is full of teams that panic. The Jets are just the most visible example right now. Detroit used to live in that space. Now, they're watching it from the outside. This offseason is going to be filled with noise. Draft speculation, coordinator chatter, rumors about who might join or leave. But underneath all of it, the Lions' biggest advantage isn't a single player or coach. It's the fact that they know who they are. And as long as that stays true, they won't have to overcorrect when things get uncomfortable because the foundation is already there. Another layer to all of this, and one that fans don't always think about in real time, is how moments like these influence future decisions long before they ever become public. When assistants around the league watch what's happening in New York and then look at how Detroit operates, it creates a quiet separation between franchises you trust and franchises you're cautious about. Coaches don't just want promotions, they want protection. They want clarity. They want to know that if something goes wrong, they won't be the first lever pulled to satisfy ownership impatience. Detroit is sending a very different signal right now. Even with change on the offensive staff, nothing feels rushed. Drew Petzing wasn't hired because of a headline. He was hired because his background aligns with what this offense wants to be physically, structurally, and situationally. Mike Kafka wasn't brought in to replace someone or undermine anyone. He was added as support, as another experienced voice in a room that values collaboration over ego. That's the kind of environment coaches talk about when they're off the record. And it's the kind of environment that attracts the right people over time. Contrast that again with what's happening with Aaron Glenn. Fair or not, his reputation is now tied to an offseason defined by firings and uncertainty. That doesn't erase the good work he did in Detroit, but it does complicate his narrative, and it reinforces a truth Lions fans know too well. Good coaches can fail in bad environments, and average coaches can thrive in good ones. Detroit finally understands that difference, and they're building everything around it. This also circles back to how the Lions evaluate their own past. There's no bitterness here toward Glenn or Engstrand. If anything, there's perspective. Detroit benefited from Glenn's growth, and now they're watching from a distance as another organization struggles to replicate what the Lions built internally. That should give fans confidence, not anxiety. The goal isn't to win the offseason. The goal is to create a system that doesn't collapse when pressure shows up. As the league continues to churn through assistants, coordinators, and quick fixes, Detroit is quietly reinforcing something that doesn't show up in box scores or headlines. They are predictable in the best possible way. You know how decisions will be made, you know who has authority, you know mistakes won't trigger panic. That predictability is exactly what allows creativity and accountability to coexist. So when you step back and look at the bigger picture, this isn't just a story about the Jets or Aaron Glenn or Tanner Engstrand. It's a reminder of where the Lions used to be and where they are now. Chaos used to define Detroit. Now, it defines everyone else. There's also an emotional layer to this that longtime Lions fans will immediately recognize because it cuts against decades of muscle memory. For years, whenever a Lions assistant left the building, the fear was always the same, that Detroit was about to lose the one good thing it had. That fear doesn't really exist anymore. When Aaron Glenn left, it felt earned, not desperate. When Tanner Engstrand left, it felt like professional growth.